Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 10th of September of 2024. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And today we can call that the 10th of September is the Russian Flag Day. So let's discuss in details, and let's discuss the first video with the Russian flag that took place in the industrial zone of the coal mine South Donbas number one. In this video we can see two Russian soldiers that raised the Russian flag, and obviously this video confirms complete control over this territory by the Russian armed forces. Of course, there are some differences between different mappers about the territory that is under complete Russian control, the area that is contested, and the Ukrainian territory. So let's discuss this in details, because according to neutral mappers and according to pro-Russian mappers, the Russians established complete control not just over the industrial zone, this territory, but also the Russians captured the Telecom, the landfill. And today, right before we start making the video, we got very interesting video. In this video, we can see the Ukrainians who were running away from the South Donbas coal mine number one, and the Ukrainians were retreating, and the Russians were following the Ukrainians. First of all, this video confirms that Ukrainians haven't abandoned their positions completely, that there are still positions around the landfill, around the Telecom, and most likely the mappers who colored this territory under complete Russian control are wrong. Most likely currently there are very heavy clashes in this area, and that the Russians are trying to force the Ukrainians to fall back much further in the direction of the village by the name of Bagayavlenka, or in the direction of the village by the name of Ugledar. So now let's move further. Now let's talk about the village of Vadiane. Today, the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of clashes during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to establish complete control over the village of Vadiane and to secure the territory. And the most important thing, that we have a lot of geolocations, a lot of videos just from the northern part of the village. So this is the first video, and in this video we can see the Russians that were raising the flag in the northern part. A few hours later, also during the 10th of September, we got another video with a very poor quality, of course, but the building was also geolocated, and in this video we can see another Russian flag in the most northern part of the village. Yet we haven't received anything from the southern part of Vadiane, so we are talking about this part, and we haven't received anything from this industrial zone. Telling the truth, if we haven't received the report from the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation about complete control over the village, we wouldn't color this territory in Russian favor. But we got report, we consider the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation as a reliable source, so this is the situation. But once again, we haven't received anything from these fields. Anyway, let's move further, and according to information we have, the Russians, as a result of offensive operation during the 10th of September, managed to establish complete control over the territory of the coal mine South Donbas number 3. So this industrial zone was also captured by the Russians, and the Ukrainians were forced to fall back further in the northwestern direction. So very difficult situation for the Ukrainians. If the information about Russian control over two coal mines is correct, then we can start counting days when the Ukrainians will be forced to fall back from this territory completely. Now let's move further, and let's talk about Krasnogorovka, because this is another stronghold, another city that was captured by the Russians, and we have additional video and the Ministry of Defense report. Yes, this is the second city that was confirmed, that control over the city was also confirmed by the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation. In this video we can see the son of anarchy, the Russian soldier that was riding on the bike. He was moving, he was heading towards the most northwestern part of the city. Then he took off from the bicycle, he took the Russian flag and established the flag over the most, once again, northwestern building in the area. This is 100% proof, 100% confirmation that the Russians established complete control over this territory, and as you can see, we have adjusted the map in Russian favor. Now the situation is getting very difficult for those Ukrainians who are currently located in between these fields, between the city of Krasnogorovka, Mariinka, Maximilianovka and Georgievka. Most likely the Russians are planning to create another cauldron in this area as well, but to complete this cauldron the Russians need to continue moving along the Maximilianovka and to try to get the most western part of the city. If the Russians are able to do this, then the Ukrainians are getting very bad situation. operation. As for the Nivoyska, we understand that the Russians most likely have already completed the operational encirclement. It's not a cauldron, but most likely if the Ukrainians are not going to abandon their positions during the next few days, they would be encircled 100%. Furthermore, according to pro-Russian sources and neutral sources, the Russians crossed the river in the northwestern part of Krasnogorovka and began clashes, very heavy clashes for these farms. If the Russians are able to take under control these farms, then this is going to be something like the beginning of the final days of this Nivoyska cauldron, of the creation of this Nivoyska cauldron. Now let's move further and let's talk about the village of Ukrainians, the city of Ukrainians, yes, the town of Girnik. As you can see, we haven't received anything from this direction. During the previous 72 hours, we've been talking a lot about the Russian attempts to enter the southern part of Ukrainsk, and we were talking a lot about the Russian attempts to take under control Girnik, but during the 10th of September, we haven't received anything from this direction. The only important videos we received a little bit further in the southeastern direction from the original position. We received a number of Russian FPV drone attacks on Ukrainian vehicles that were moving along main supply roads, and now we see and we understand that the Russians moved their death road. So the main death road used to be on the line between Girnik and Selidova, and now the Russians, as you can see, moved deeper inside of the territory of Ukraine, and the Russians are using one important rule. Where the Russians are moving drones in the same direction, the Russians are planning to move their army. This is the most important tactics that the Russians are using in the Pokrovsk direction. Once again, first the Russians are moving drone deep inside of the territory of Ukraine, and then the Russians are moving soldier towards this or that death road. So based on this configuration of the line of combat contact, based on this, on the geolocations with FPV drones, we see that the Russians most likely are planning to move in direction of Girnik. So if we compare the priorities between this town of Ukrainsk and the town of Girnik, most likely the Russians prefer to attack in the southern direction, and we can understand this, because if the Russians, as a result of their offensive operation, are able to take under control the northern and the northeast and the eastern part of the town of Girnik, then they will be able to create a cauldron, not just operational encirclement that we have already see in the Pokrovsk, in the Kurakhova direction, but a real cauldron, because the Ukrainians from this perspective are no longer available to evacuate their forces through the village of Zariani and Kurachovka. Now let's move further, and we started receiving updates from Selidova. The Ukrainian sources published a lot of videos from the southwestern part of Mikhailovka. In this video we can see the Ukrainian drone that was attacking the Russian forces, and which confirms Russian positions in this area. Based on this video we have adjusted the map and added additional territory under complete Russian control. We are talking about this part. Furthermore, we continue receiving updates from the Ukrainian side. In this video we can see a number of Russian artillery strikes on the edge Russian positions in the to the south of Mikhailovka. So both videos confirms that, and these are not the only videos that we received from this direction. During the previous week we received significant number of videos exactly in this part, which confirms that most likely the Ukrainians are planning to conduct their first counterattack, their first attempt to counterattack the Russian positions, and most likely the Ukrainians are planning to counterattack using this road. So if the Ukrainians are able to achieve success, they will be able to cut this territory in two. They will be able to cut M30 road, and they will be able to cut Mikhailovka from Memrik. Now let's move further, and as you can see we have colored the village of Marinovka under complete Russian control. During the previous 24 hours the Ukrainian forces of the 68th Jaeger Brigade published the video of how they were counterattacking the Russian forces on the Russian positions to the west of the village. So in this video we can see a Ukrainian tank that was attacking the Russian positions within a very short distance, almost like from let's say 100-200 meters. And when the Ukrainian tank was empty, when the Russians began bombing the Ukrainian tank, the Ukrainians decided to retreat and to fall back from the territory. So this video was geolocated. The Ukrainian tank was located exactly in these fields, and the Ukrainians were attacking these Russian positions. So due to this video, based on the fact that these Russian positions are located to the west of the village of Marinovka, we came to conclusion that most likely the village of Marinovka was captured by the Russians. Once again, the Ukrainian tank was moving through the fields. The Ukrainian tank stopped somewhere in this point, and from this point the Ukrainians were attacking the Russian positions along this tree line. When the Ukrainian tank was empty, the tank returned back using this route of evacuation. So once again, based on this video, we have turned this territory in Russian control. Now let's move further. Let's talk about Novogrodovka. We have three icons in this area and 2 geolocations. If you remember, we start talking a lot about this territory yesterday, and we were talking about the same thing. This is Russian tactics. First, the Russians are sending drones to establish complete control over the supply roads, and then the Russians are moving in the direction of these death roads that the Russians created by the FPV drones. So during the previous 24 hours, we got additional videos of how the Russians were hunting and attacking the Ukrainian vehicles to the west of Novogrodovka. This video confirms complete control over the territory. This is the first Russian FPV drone attack. As a result of this attack, 1 vehicle was destroyed, and in this area we can see another Russian FPV drone attack, and as a result of this attack, 1 more vehicle of the armored forces of Ukraine was destroyed. Furthermore, according to neutral pro-Ukrainian mappers, the Russians began moving towards the area of FPV drone controls. So during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions and to capture the tree lines to the west of Novogrodovka. Now let's move further and let's talk about the village of Mikhailovka. We have geolocation. In this video, we can see the Russians were attacking the Ukrainian vehicle. This is very important video because according to different mappers, neutral mappers and pro-Russian mappers, this territory was captured by the Russians a few days ago, or even a few weeks ago, probably at the beginning of the Pokrovsk offensive operation, but without any geolocations, of course. And now we start receiving geolocations, and the geolocations are saying that at least the northeastern part of Mykolaiivka is under complete Ukrainian control. We will adjust this part of the village in Ukrainian favor. Now let's move further to the city of Grodovka. Today we got another video with the Russian flag. The Russians managed to improve their positions in the central part of the city. They got closer to the river of Zhuravka. This video confirms a few things. First of all, this video confirms that most of the mappers who have already colored the entire Grodovka under complete Russian control are wrong. There are still very heavy clashes. Most likely, let's say, the Russians control around 50 or 60% of this town, and probably 20% is in the gray zone and 20% under complete Ukrainian control. Anyway, there are still very heavy clashes, and obviously during the next few days the Russians will be able to improve their positions further in the western direction. Now let's move further to the city of Pokrovsk. The Russians continue attacking and destroying the Ukrainian logistic. In this video we can see the bridge, the main western bridge that Ukrainians are using for logistic, for bringing additional forces and reserves, and as a result of missile strike the bridge was completely damaged and destroyed. Now let's move further to the New York-Toretsk agglomeration. As for this direction, we haven't received anything special. The only thing, we got some video from New York itself, and the most important thing is that a lot of mappers were using this video to confirm complete Russian control over industrial zone, but the building was geolocated at the end, and as you can see, this building where the Russians raised another Russian flag is very far from the industrial zone. So this video doesn't confirm any control, any progress of the Russian forces, just the Russians managed to improve their positions a little bit in this part of New York. Now let's move further and let's talk about Chasiv Yar. We have lots of geolocations and lots of updates from this direction. The Russians managed to improve their positions in the central part of Kalinovka. The Ukrainian sources published the video how they were bombing and attacking the edge Russian positions. Based on this video, most of the mappers have adjusted the map. We used to have this territory in contested area. Now we have colored this territory under complete Russian control. Now let's move further. According to the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation, as a result of very heavy clashes, the group of forces center at the group of forces south managed to establish complete control over the village by the name of Grigorevka. So the territory was captured by the Russians, and based on the Ministry of Defense report, we have adjusted the map. Now we see that the Russians don't have enough of forces to cross and to begin full-scale offensive operation on the Ukrainian side of the Seversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal, and we see that currently the Russians are trying to improve their positions and improve their flanks. The control over the village of Grigorevka is very important progress of the armed force of Russian Federation, because now the Russians are able to move further in the western direction to take under control the entire Seversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal, and the most important, from this foothold the Russians are able to cross canal and to begin full-scale offensive operation in direction of the northern part of Chasiv Yar. And the thing is that, as we discussed in the previous videos, the highest point in the Chasiv Yar direction is this hill, and if the Russians are able to take this hill under control, then from these positions the Russians will be able to see everything, not just in Chasiv Yar, but also everything in Konstantinovka. Today we got additional reports and we got additional video that was published by the Russian sources between Zaliznyanska, Minkovka and Orekhovo-Vasilievka. In this video we can see another Russian attempt to attack, and as a result of this offensive the Russians managed to establish control over significant territories. But there are a few important details that I would like to discuss with you about this video. The sources that began spreading this video reported that these events, this offensive operation conducted by the Russians, took place yesterday or the day before yesterday, and as a result of this offensive the Russians captured significant territories. The problem is that the video was published just today or maybe yesterday, and if we increase the numbers of days since the beginning of July, we're gonna see that some neutral mappers have already adjusted their maps in Russian favor exactly in this point. So as I understand, the Russians managed to improve these positions in the late July, but just in the early September we received first geolocations and first videos that confirms Russian progress in this direction. Now let's move further. Today the Russians also published additional videos from the village of Sporne. The village was captured by the Russians probably 2 months or 2 months ago, and this information was reported by the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation. Most likely the Ukrainians conducted a number of counterattacks, and maybe the Ukrainians managed to restore control over the western part or something like this, because today the Russians decided once again to raise Russian flag on the territory of the village. Of course, currently we have no doubts that the Russians captured the village, because the last time we adjusted the map in this area, we adjusted based on the Ministry of Defense report, and now we have not just the Ministry of Defense report but also the video that confirms Russian control over the village completely. Now let's move further. Let's talk about the southern Kupiansk direction, and we have additional changes on the ground in the Russian favor. In this video we can see the Ukrainians that were FPV droning the Russians on the Ukrainian side of Zherebets river. We have a Russian soldier that was moving along the road and the Ukrainians began bombing him. Based on this video, most of the mappers have adjusted their maps in Russian favor, and basically the eastern and the central part of Makiivka were captured by the Russians completely. And we have additional changes on the ground to the southeast of Makiivka. In this video we can see another Ukrainian drone drone flamethrower system. The Ukrainians were burning Russian positions. Very terrible weapon. It destroyed positions completely. When talking about manpower and soldiers, you can let's say avoid and to escape damage, but as for positions, they are reduced to ruins by this drone. Now let's move further. Let's talk about the Kursk direction. There are very heavy clashes in this area, and the thing is that the front line became stable. There are no movements, almost no movements. We just got reports that the Russians managed to restore control over the village by the name of Borki. Let's wait for additional updates for tomorrow. Maybe tomorrow some mappers, reliable mappers, will adjust their maps. As for the Korineva direction, as you can see, we have lots of FABs in this area. The Ukrainians continue concentration of their forces, regrouping, and the Russians are bombing them with FAB 3000, with FAB 1500. The Russians are bombing the Ukrainian positions with smaller FABs. And the most important, that the Russians are also destroying the Ukrainian logistic. In this video, the Russians try to destroy the bridge to the east of Sumy, trying to destroy the logistic road that Ukrainians are using to redeploy their forces from Ukraine on the territory of the Kursk direction. Now let's talk about other important updates. As you know, Iran recently provided or promised to send, or have already sent, missiles, long-range missiles to Russia. And this is very important because currently the Western countries are very upset about the situation. United Kingdom have already let's say made sanctions, restrictions on Iran, and today we got report that Biden will discuss granting Ukraine permission to carry out long-range strikes on Russian territory with the British Prime Minister on Friday. So that was reported by Blinken. The Secretary of State also announced sanctions against Iran due to the supply of the short-range ballistic missiles to Russia. And this is the things and the negotiations that are taking place from Ukrainian side. And on the other hand, the very high authority people from China and India are going to come to Russia to talk and to discuss something with Vladimir Putin. The thing is that as soon as if Ukrainians are authorized to use long-range missiles on the territory of Russia, they will begin bombing a lot of objects, facilities, infrastructural objects of Russia, energy facilities, Moscow, St. Petersburg, and of course Russia will be able to counterattack Ukraine, and not just with missiles or cruise missiles. The Russians most likely will be able to start using the nuclear weapon. As for the Western countries, they have some concerns about this, and the most important concern is that Russia can use nuclear attack in space that would send giant waves of electromagnetic pulses. This will destroy the satellites in the world, and this is the only thing that scares the Western countries. At least this was reported by different Western media. So now there are negotiations about this. Ukrainians will be authorized to use long-range missiles on the territory of Russia, and the Russians need to respond. And telling the truth, Russians need to respond not to Ukraine in this case. In this case, Russia needs to find an answer to the Western countries. And that's it for today. Military Summary Channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, show me Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.